Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling a concept that hits pretty close to home for a very specific group of people. We're talking about the gifted child burnout. Yeah, it's a heavy phrase, right? We're going to completely deconstruct what this actually means and dive into that lingering, honestly kind of painful question, why you lost your spark. Because listen, we're not just talking about feeling a little tired after a long week at work, we're unpacking a very specific trajectory of exhaustion. We're tracing this entire journey, right from that initial early promise all the way to present-day fatigue.
So, did you lose your spark? It's a pretty striking question when you really stop and think about it. I mean, a spark implies ignition, right? It's potential. It's this sudden burst of energy that's supposed to start a much larger fire. But for so many of us, that light just goes out. And we have to confront this core premise right off the bat. It's that sense of feeling totally hollowed out. That feeling where the effortless energy you used to have just simply isn't there anymore. Look, if you're hearing this and feeling that deep sense of recognition, of just heavy bone-deep exhaustion, you are exactly who this explainer is for.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. The Rise. The Gifted Child Label.
Really think about the weight of those two words, gifted child. It's not just some casual compliment a teacher throws around, it's a foundational label. It literally represents the early identification of potential, that spark of early promise we just talked about. But here's the thing. A label is a really heavy thing to wear. It essentially sets this invisible baseline where excellence isn't a goal to strive for anymore. It's the bare minimum requirement. When your entire identity is tied from a super young age to just being naturally smart, suddenly having to actually struggle or try hard feels like a profound personal failure. The label creates this trap where your worth gets tied entirely to innate ability rather than resilience or hard work. And that right there, that is the exact starting point of the trajectory that ultimately leads to total exhaustion.
Which brings us directly to part 2, the weight, the reality of burnout.
Now, this burnout we're talking about, it is definitely not a random occurrence. It is the direct consequence, and so often the current reality, of the former gifted child. We are talking about a highly specific type of exhaustion. It's the result of sustaining an absolutely unsustainable level of expectation. You know, when your baseline is absolute perfection, the sheer energy required just to maintain the status quo is immense. It's honestly like a massive debt coming due after years of running on that high-octane gifted fuel. Eventually, the whole system just shuts down because the engine was running way too hot for way too long without a single break. The pressure just becomes too much for one person to carry.
And this brilliantly illustrates the tension at play here. Just look at this profound divide. On one side, you have the expectation, this soaring, limitless ceiling of the gifted child. And then on the other side, the reality, the heavy, completely grounded floor of burnout. The gap between these two extremes, that is exactly where the psychological friction happens. It's the massive cognitive dissonance of knowing what you were supposed to be versus the crushing reality of what you actually feel like today. And here's the kicker. The higher that initial expectation was set, the steeper and more jarring the fall into burnout truly is.
Let's move to and see how this builds in part 3, the void, why you lost your spark.
Losing your spark is almost never an overnight accident, right? It's really a progressive 3-phase journey of depletion. Think about it. In phase 1, childhood, that gifted label gets applied. This is the golden era of effortless achievement and constant high praise. But then, as we transition into phase 2, adolescence, the onset of burnout begins to creep in. The systems get more complex. Suddenly, that natural talent just isn't quite enough to coast by anymore. But because everything came so easily before, you literally haven't been taught how to study or, honestly, how to navigate struggle. So panic sets in. The sheer willpower required to just stay gifted starts to deeply drain your reserves. Until finally, we arrive at phase 3, the present day, defined entirely by that lost spark.
I want to just pause here for a second. The lost spark. There is a really profound sadness in that phrase, isn't there? It speaks to a very specific kind of grief. You're mourning not just your lost energy, but you're actually mourning a past version of yourself, a version that was bright, deeply curious, and endlessly capable. You see, the spark is what makes work feel like play. When it's gone, every single thing becomes an uphill climb, leaving behind this massive void right where that effortless enthusiasm used to live. And so, we arrive at the end by turning this directly over to you. We've looked at the weight of the label, the crushing reality of the burnout, and that chronological timeline of how early promise just slowly fades into total exhaustion. So, looking back at your own timeline, your own expectations, and those heavy labels you might have carried, why did you lose your spark? And honestly, more importantly, now that you can actually see the architecture of your burnout, how might you begin to strike the flint again? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I truly hope this sparks a deeper conversation within yourself.